Good afternoon. I'm Scott Litke, the Executive Director of the Institute for Holocaust Education, and welcome to our annual monthly third Thursday Lunch and Learn program. This month, we are honored to have with us Steve Goldberg. Steve's presentation today is titled My Friend Abe, and Steve came to me as a recommendation from someone that we work with. Steve is located in Durham, North Carolina, and it's a very interesting story. Steve was a 20-year plus career high school history teacher, and he is going to share the story of his friend Abe. And I don't want to say anything else because it will come out in the whole presentation, but we're also honored that Steve will be joining us in March for the Week of Understanding and will be one of our out-of-town speakers, but also is going to be the featured speaker at the Durham Museum on the Wednesday evening of the Week of Understanding. So, Steve, I am going to turn it over to you and put myself on mute.
Great. Thank you, Scott, and welcome everybody. I'm going to share my screen with you. So I'll be in the corner. I'll go ahead and do that. And I'm going to go for about an hour and maybe a little less. And then I'd love any questions that you have. Feel free to, as you have questions as we go, you can put it in the chat. Scott, if you can monitor that for me, I can't do that while I'm presenting, but if somebody puts something good in there, let me know and we'll break in. And I look forward to questions that y'all may have. So let's see if this works. There we go. That's my email if you want to follow up later, and mrgoldberg@gmail.com. And I'm going to tell you about my friend Abe, who is right over here. So that's a better picture of Abe. That's one of my favorite pictures of him. He was about 90 and a half years old when I took that picture at his home in Raleigh. And he was born in Poland, and I'll go through his background in a minute, but he spent the last 10 years of his life in Raleigh and spoke to a variety of schools, and that's how I met him. I was teaching U.S. history at the time, and again, I'll get to that in my presentation. I love this picture of Abe, and this is probably not what you think of when you think of a Holocaust survivor, but he was one of the most joyful people I've ever met. His daughter, Pam, showed this picture of him at the unveiling for in Jewish tradition after, a year after roughly a year, 11 months to a year after a person dies, there's an unveiling, which is sort of like a second commemoration of the person's life. And that was the picture that she chose to pass around at that event. I love this picture in particular. There are 6 candles behind Abe. He's a featured speaker at a local military base here, and just that smile on his face is wonderful. And then this picture I just got from Abe's son. I guess it was Monsters College had just come out, and they were living in Florida. And his son said, "Why don't you stand over there next to there?" And you get this goofy expression from a man who still maintained his humanity after all that happened to him. So, as I said, Abe spoke all over North Carolina. He probably spoke to close to 200 audiences in the final decade of his life. And I wish you could have met him in person. There aren't any pictures of him as a young person. This picture here is the earliest that we have of him. He was in a displaced persons camp in Germany and was 17 years old. His parents and younger sister were almost certainly murdered at Treblinka. He never saw them when he was separated from them. He never saw them again, but I'm pretty certain that's what happened to them. This is the first time he spoke about what happened to him. People knew for his life that he was a Holocaust survivor, but they also knew he gave off a vibe, I don't want to talk about it. And you'll see a couple clips today from his Shoah interview in 1995, which was the first time he spoke about the Holocaust in 50 years. And then this is how I think of him, because he had just turned 90 when I met him. I actually met him in November of 2018, but this picture is from a little bit after that. So you can't meet Abe in person because he passed away in 2020. And I'll get to how he asked me to keep telling his story. But I do have a recording, and I'm going to let Abe introduce himself here. And throughout this presentation, if we do this right, you should feel like you got to know Abe even though he is not with us. So this is Abe introducing himself at his house in Raleigh, North Carolina. Introduce yourself. Who are you? Where do you live today? And how old are you?
Well, how old are you? I'm 90 and a half. Yeah, my name is Abe Piasek. I was born in Poland in 1928. And I came to the United States in 1947.
And how did that happen?
That's a really, that's a really long story, and a good one. After the war, but during the war was bad.
So we're going to unpack during the war was bad in a moment here. As I said, I had the fortune to become good friends with Abe, even though he's 40 years older than me. And shortly before he passed away, he asked me to keep telling his story. This is the 174th time that I have told his story. And I'm looking forward to more in person in Omaha coming up. So what I thought we'd do today is just talk a little bit about what Abe went through. How did he get to the U.S. so that we were able to meet and become friends? And then he did something incredibly courageous at the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. that we'll talk about. He went into a cattle car and narrated his liberation story. And I have that on video. And then most of what we'll do, it's in bold, is hear some of his really long story in his own words via videos, and then hopefully you'll have questions, comments, thoughts. If that seems like a good agenda, give me a thumbs up. All right, I see some thumbs up. We will proceed. So what did he go through? For this audience, you all probably know the answer to this question, but often when I speak to audiences, I ask, what was the Holocaust? And it's interesting, a lot of times I'll get something like 6 million Jews were killed. And that's a really interesting sentence because there's no actor in it and it's very passive. And so this is adopted a little bit from the Holocaust Memorial Museum. You could do other definitions, but it was the systematic, and we'll talk about how systematic in a little bit here, state-sponsored persecution and murder of 6 million Jews and millions of others between 33 and 45. And the Nazis did not do that alone. They had allies and collaborators. So when I usually present, I talk about how there were 9.5 million Jews in Europe in 1933, roughly, and Abe was one of the roughly 3 to 3.3 million in Poland. And when I showed this recently, a woman said, "Your map's wrong." I said, "What do you mean my map's wrong?" She said, "Well, my family's from Greece. And I want you to have a map that shows the whole thing." I thought it was easier to focus on Poland by cutting the map off. But there are all these 9.5 million people were impacted by the Holocaust, as was everybody involved in World War II. But I wanted to just have the map to get a sense of 2.5 million in the Soviet Union, and you can see where some of these other folks are. Germany has 565,000, which may sound like a lot, but Germany's population was about 80 million, so it's less than 1%. 1% would be 800,000. So it's not like there were lots of Jews in Germany necessarily. And again, about 2/3 of the Jews in Europe were murdered, but all the Jews in Europe were persecuted, including Abe. How do you think of a number as big as 6 million? I usually present in North Carolina. It would be about half of our population, or all of South Carolina, plus 500,000. For folks in Nebraska, if you think of your state times three, everybody in your state three times would get you to 6 million. And a journalist named Peter Fox said, if you want to wrap your mind around how big that is, to honor each victim would take 16,000 years. We don't have 16,000 years. We're going to focus on Abe, but we're going to do so recognizing that he was one of millions. And then one last thing I learned in studying Abe's story, I had the thought that before I really started looking into this, there was a roughly steady stream of murders that added to 6 million. And that's not the case at all. There's a biologist named Louis Stone who published some research in Scientific American, and instead of like this, it looked like that. And during August, September, and October of 1942, about 1.5 million. I hate to have a graph with murders per month on it, but it's the Holocaust. You knew what you signed up for when you came here. That's 1.5 million Jews. That's 25% of all the Jews murdered during the Holocaust in just 100 days. And if you break that down further, that's 15,000 murders per day. And that's the systematic nature of the Holocaust. The red is total. The green is just three camps in Poland, Treblinka, Sobibor, and Bujec, and they're located here in eastern Poland. Pretty sure, like I said, that Abe's mother, father, and little sister were taken to Treblinka, although he never saw them again, and that there aren't records of that. But the folks in their town were, most of the folks were taken there. I can send this out to y'all later on. It depends how you count with the border between the Soviet Union and Poland, but about 99% of Poland's Jews were murdered during the Holocaust. And you can see that played out in the graph here. The green has flatlined. There are no more Jews left to kill in Poland, right? This bump here is the Hungarian, Romanian, Transylvanian Jews. So Elie Wiesel's book Night, that's taking place here, which is reasonably late in terms of the overall span of the Holocaust. And then, as you all know, the Holocaust didn't start in 1942. I got this from Louis Stone, the person who published this research. He wanted to show this peak, but you could back up. You could even back up to 1933 when Hitler came to power. I'm going to back up to when Abe started feeling the effects of the Holocaust in September of 39 when Germany invaded his home country of Poland. The Jews in Abe's town were confined to a ghetto. Germany then invaded Russia. And many of you may be familiar with about 1 million Jews were murdered by bullets in roughly this year between 41 and 42. And then there were death marches toward the end of the war. So I think Abe's story is a really that's when Abe was liberated. So his story is a really powerful vehicle for looking at the entire swath of the Holocaust, at least from a Polish person's perspective. So he was a witness and he survived. I want to talk a little bit about what he went through, and then we'll get into more details coming up. He was born in this little town in sort of central Poland between Warsaw and Radom. And at age 13, he was taken from his family and forced to work as a slave laborer at a camp called Radom. As the Russians were approaching from this direction, he was marched 55 miles to a train station. He'd never seen a train before in his life. And he asked some of the older people there what that was, and they told him that's, a train whistle. Each one of these red arrows is a cattle car journey that Abe took, and he took probably 6 or 7 of them throughout the Holocaust. I'm just showing the major ones here. He survived a selection at Auschwitz. And then this is probably a 5 or 6 day cattle car ride into Western Germany to a camp called Weihingen. He was there for a few months. He was then transferred to a camp called Hessenthal, and then was headed in the direction of Dachau. It's a longer story than just that arrow. But near Dachau, he was liberated when his train was bombed on either side, and he was able to, the people from the outside opened the door, and he went into a bomb crater that would have looked something like this here. This is another picture of a bomb crater, and you'll hear him discuss, or I'm not sure if I have it in this video, but if you listen to his full 5-minute video of him describing when he was liberated, he talks about getting Red Cross packages there. When he was liberated, he weighed about 75 pounds, and he was 16 and a half years old. He spent 2 years in displaced persons camps just outside of Munich. And then, we already talked about the point. Sorry about that. That slide shouldn't be in there. So he crossed the Atlantic. I'm just getting him to North Carolina so we can meet here. He crossed the Atlantic in the summer of 47, settled in Connecticut, met his wife, raised 2 kids, and he was a baker there. And we'll talk a little bit more about his career as a baker in Connecticut. He and his wife then, once the kids were raised, moved to California in 1975. They lived there for about 17 years, and then he retired to Florida. That's the bakery he worked at in Los Angeles. That's him doing something funny with a large gorilla, it looks like. And then this is him in he was in Florida, and that's a picture of him with his wife from '93. I think this is roughly the same time period. Her name is Shirley. And again, as I mentioned, he didn't really speak about the Holocaust until he was interviewed by the Shoah Foundation. And that's when he started speaking to groups of people. He lived in Boca Raton and he spoke around the area there. And he spoke enough that he was given the President's Volunteer Service Award in 2005 for the work that he had done speaking in those areas. And then in 2009, they moved to from Florida to North Carolina to be near their daughter Pam, who you'll meet very soon in this video. That's the house that he lived in Raleigh. And like I said, he spoke to probably 15,000 people. And he spoke at military bases. This is him talking to teachers. And he spoke with lots and lots of students all over the state. And that gets us to how I met Abe and became friends with him. He came to the school where I was teaching called Research Triangle High School. And I was teaching U.S. history. And our German teacher arranged for us to commemorate 80 years since Kristallnacht, which was in November of 1938. And so I learned on November 8th that a Holocaust survivor is coming on Tuesday. And so I had 5 days to prepare. And I said, well, what is the speaker's name? And I was told Abe Piasek. And so I looked him up and I found a document that talked about how he survived a death train. And I found videos of him. And I watched probably 5 hours of video of him. I became enthralled with his personality, with his story, complicated the Holocaust or my vision of the Holocaust in really interesting ways. And so when he came and spoke at my school, and when I did the research, I said that this due diligence here, I shared my research with my school community, and my principal said, well, do you want to introduce him? And I said, sure. I'd be happy to. We didn't have an auditorium, so he actually spoke 4 times. He spoke to our ninth graders for 45 minutes, and then our 10th graders for 45 minutes. Then he went home and came back the next week and spoke to our 11th and 12th graders. And I think the reason I got so interested in Abe's story is that's my grandfather, and he had a lovely 90th birthday party. He didn't usually walk around with a blue ribbon on, but as I was researching Abe, I learned that it was his 90th birthday on the day I was doing most of my research, November 10th, 2018. And so he had just turned 90. And so I hoped he had a good birthday party. And again, I was very excited to hear him speak. This is the first picture I ever took of Abe. When he came to our school, you can see he's wearing a checkered shirt and a gray sweater. And when he came back, he was wearing a different jacket. This is him after he spoke with our 11th graders, and students had lots of questions for him. And I had questions too, but he had to leave and I had to go teach my next class. So I didn't get to ask them at the time, but I said to him, can I follow up with you? And he said, sure. And so he gave me his number and I called him and I went to his house in Raleigh. And I brought I had a big long chronology. It was 4 pages long. And I said, wait, which uncle? I was trying to get all the details down of his story. And we talked for about 2 hours. This is him giving me a cup of tea. I said, can I take your picture? He said, sure. And I told people I had met with this Holocaust survivor for 2 hours at his house. They said, that's amazing. Did you video it? And I said, no, I thought that would be weird. I wanted to just talk with him. And they said, you're an idiot. If you talk to a Holocaust survivor, you have an obligation to record it. And I said, you're right. And so when I went back, now we've graduated to the powdered donut stage of our relationship. We're really getting close. And Abe said I could record him. And we talked again for about 2 hours. And as I was packing my things up, I mentioned that some of my students were interested in visiting the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. And Abe perked up at that and he said, oh, I've never been. Maybe I'll go with you. I said, are you serious? Like, we've only really talked twice outside of our meeting at the school. And I got to know his daughter and we decided to I put the trip together and he came with us, and local media found out about the trip and they did this piece in anticipation of our visit. Sorry, there we go.
Holocaust survivor living in the Triangle is preparing for a very emotional trip. He's heading to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. for the very first time. Anthony Wilson has his story and how he's educating young people right here in our area.
I really didn't want to go, but the kids are going.
That's Abe Piasek talking about his upcoming visit to the National Holocaust Museum. He shared his story of survival in the concentration camps with Jonah Kaplan and students like those in Steve Goldberg's high school class.
At the beginning, it was very hard. And even today, the past 4 or 5 years, it's still a little difficult, but I have to say it and tell them what happened to a 11-year-old kid.
I mean, he's 90 and willing to talk about it. And, you know, there are very few people who meet that intersection still today. So it's an amazing opportunity.
To accompany Goldberg's class on a field trip to D.C.
It feels good somebody wants to do that, a teacher.
So I was glad to make Abe feel good, and we went to the Holocaust Museum. I don't know how many folks have been there in DC. When you go in, well, I'll get to that in a second. But this is it's about a 4-hour drive, 4.5 hours from where we are in North Carolina. So we stayed at a hotel the night before. He's wearing a hat that says "World's Best Great Grandpa." 2 of his great granddaughters were with us on the trip, and they gave him that hat. And that's the great granddaughters over here. That's his daughter, Pam. There's Abe. There's me in the back. And we went out for pizza the night before. And what I did was I had people rotate through so that everybody got a chance to sit with Abe. You know how when you're at a dinner party and you're not at the table with the guest of honor and you're kind of bummed out? So people sat with Abe for 3 minutes, and then I kicked that group out. And the next group came in, and Abe and the students both appreciated the opportunity just to talk with him as a human being and not as, you know, a Holocaust survivor who it's difficult to relate to. So the next morning we went to the museum. Let's took a group picture outside there, and then we went in. When you go in the museum, you take an elevator up to the 4th floor, and then you see exhibits on 4. It's like a spiral. You see exhibits on 3, on 2, and you exit into the lobby. And we didn't know if Abe was going to just meet other survivors in the lobby or go into the exhibit. I've since learned from his daughter that he was not planning to go into the museum. But he learned that there was a cattle car on the 3rd floor. And he said, I want to go. This is us going in the elevator up to the 4th floor. And he said, I want to see that. And I turned to his daughter. I said, I don't want to traumatize your dad. Do you think that's okay? And she said, yeah, I think it'll be all right. And so when we got up to the 4th floor, we were led by this docent whose father was a Holocaust survivor. We were led down to a private elevator that took us down to the 3rd floor. So Abe at age 90 wouldn't have to walk to see the cattle car, to see the exhibits on the way there. This, if you can see it over here on the side, that's the cattle car. Abe had not seen a cattle car in 74 years and was not planning to see one on the day that we visited in April of 2019. You can see his daughter is holding on to him, both to make sure that he doesn't fall, but also because it's a very emotional thing to be going into a cattle car. And that's what it looks like. We were walking in over this way, and there's a walkway runs through the cattle car. It looks about like that. So picture Abe standing here. I'm standing next to him. His family is ringed around him, and my students are the outer ring here. I was at the museum recently, and most folks who go through the cattle car, you spend maybe 15, 20 seconds walking through there. Abe stopped and started talking to us, and we were there for 5 minutes. I'm not going to show you the full 5-minute video. If you search for Abe Piasek cattle car, it's on YouTube with his family's permission, but I'll play you a couple clips from that. And the courage it took for him to do that is unbelievable to me. So this is just as everybody got into the cattle car.
Everybody here?
Close.
Yeah. Well, I was standing, was Mr. Goldberg is standing right there. The door was shut, and we were, you can imagine, about at least between 150 to 200 people, maybe a little bit more, standing or sitting, or you couldn't lay down. And there was the only tiny window was on the side over here. I was leaning on the wall, and a friend of mine was leaning next to me, and that's how it was. This went on when they took us from one camp to another. And the last camp was they bombed one side, then they bombed the other side, and you can imagine a big car like this picking up us 3, 4, 5 feet in the air and fell down. So what kind of feeling that was. And at that time I passed out.
So I just want to do a quick check on that. Abe's car, it may have felt like he went 3, 4, 5 feet in the air, but his car probably went 6 inches in the air. But when it came down with quite a thud. And also, if you know anything about the cattle cars, if you have 80 people in the cattle car, it is pretty close to fall. You maybe could get 100 people in a cattle car. You wouldn't get 150 to 200. Again, I understand it felt that way to him, and he's not a professional person who counts people in cattle cars, but just for the historical record, it would be probably closer to 80 to 100 people in the car. After the bombing, like I said, people waited. They couldn't just open the door and go out because they were afraid of getting machine gunned. But someone finally opened the door from the outside and they exited into this bomb crater. He talks about getting food from the Red Cross. Some people ate the food too quickly and got very sick and or passed away, actually, because their bodies just couldn't handle that food. And this is Abe toward the end of that 5 minutes of describing what it was like in the cattle car.
And that's how I was liberated. And from then on, it's went up and up and up, and I'm here. I didn't think I would ever set foot in a car. It's my heart is pounding, and I had to show you.
So I mean, we could stop there, and that's an incredible story that he did that. I get chills whenever I play that video. We were on the 3rd floor. Abe took the elevator down to the 1st floor. We walked around and saw some of the exhibits, and he met a woman named Agi Giva. Scott, if you could put that in the chat for folks, it's Agigeva. She Googles extremely well. Agigeva, Agi Giva. And she talked about meeting Mengele. If you're interested in that, if you Google her, there's a good story that she tells. But she she asked my students if they wanted to see her. I'm just checking the chat here. Thank you for. Yeah, great. She asked my students, do you want to see my tattoo? They said yes. She rolled up her arm, and she described again. We'll see a selection later on here. Her mother and older sister were sent to the left, and she was sent to the right, and she was in front of Dr. Mengele, and she was Hungarian, but she knew German. And she was arguing with Mengele. No, I can work. Let me go to the left with my mother and older sister. And he was so impressed with her German that he said, okay, you can work. Go ahead to the left. And Agi was asked, but when she shared her story at the Holocaust Museum, it was like an hour-long talk. They said, weren't you afraid of Mengele? And she said, no, I was afraid of my mother. She told me not to get separated from her. So Abe and Agi were talking with one another. She was very impressed that he had gone into the cattle car. She said she would never do that. She lives in Rockville, Maryland, just outside, maybe half an hour away, depending on traffic, from the museum. And she often meets with with survivors who come from out of town. So we left the Holocaust Museum, drove back to Raleigh, where Abe lives, and in the summer of 2019, I interviewed him several times at his house, trying to get more details about him. I think we got 5 or 6 interviews in over the summer. And one time when I was talking with him, I asked him to describe what it was like to see the Statue of Liberty when he came over in 1947. And this is what he had to say. And were you able to see the Statue of Liberty?
Yes, oh yes, lit up, oh my God. That was something. I got a picture of it.
A picture of the. Wait, do you have a camera with you?
Yeah, I had a picture of it, the Statue of Liberty.
Well, who took the picture?
I forgot who, a friend of mine.
Oh, and then.
No, I'm not in the picture, but I saw the Statue of Liberty.
Right.
And they took the picture, and I got a picture of it.
Do you have the picture here?
Yeah, right here.
Hey. So we get up from his kitchen, we walk toward his bedroom, and on the wall, every night before he goes to bed, every morning when he wakes up, he sees this framed picture that says August 3rd, 1947, Freedom for me, Abe. And that he celebrated August 3rd as his personal Independence Day, particularly later in life. In 2007, they had a 60-year party for him. He was living in Florida. His daughter hosted a party, and his son hosted a party in New York as well. And so I was all excited after the summer to get Abe to speak again at my school. I was teaching U.S. history, so we weren't going to get to World War II in September, but I figured let's get Abe in while we can. And I said, I'm going to set this time. It won't be just 45 minutes. It'll be a 2-hour in-school field trip. The whole junior class will be there. Abe, are you up for that? And he said, yes, I'm ready. Bring it on. And so I was doing more research about him, and this is the ship that brought him to the United States, and that's the manifest, and he's listed right there. Abe Piasek, 18 years old, male, single, Polish, and that's not Abe on the ship. I guess that was a popular haircut at the time, but that's, about what people were looking like around that time. This is the ticket that brought him to the U.S. We got a deal at $134 plus $8 tax. So I'm doing all this research. I'm all excited. Abe's supposed to come. And I called him to confirm some details, and he didn't call me back, which was odd. Like, he wouldn't call back the same day necessarily, but within 24 hours he would call back. And so I called his daughter Pam, and I said, what's going on? I want to make sure everything's set. And she said, oh, I'm so sorry. I meant to call you. It's been pretty hectic. Abe was working in his garage, and he fell. And when you're 90 and you fall, it's a big deal. And he was bleeding from his head, and he had to be hospitalized. And they stabilized him and got him patched up. But he was in the hospital for about 3 weeks. And as he was getting better there, he told the nurses that he was a survivor. And they said, well, can we hear your story? And he said, sure. And so on October 2nd, he told his story one last time in public to a group. You can see a camera here. If you Google Abe Piasek Hospital, you'll find the little piece that they did. But he's in a room, in a lobby with probably 70 people, doctors, nurses, patients, staff, all listening to this man speak for about an hour and a half, while in a neck brace in a wheelchair. And that was what he did. He told his story whenever he could tell his story, as a warning for people. He was released from the hospital. He couldn't really take care of himself, but he was feeling well enough to do an interview. The University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, there were some students doing a piece about the Holocaust, and they got in touch with Abe. And I'm not going to show you the whole piece that they did. Well, first, this is one of the reporters who did the piece. And I got in touch with her after Abe had passed away and asked her what were her impressions of Abe. And this is what she said.
But with Abe, he just was so honest and just told us everything. And he was the most open book. And when he told us all his stories and how sad they were, I was surprised. Like, I would have I don't know. I would have been very uncomfortable sharing some of the stuff he shared, but you can tell that he's, told the story so many times that it's kind of like, I have a purpose now. I want to tell people, how bad this was so that it doesn't happen again.
And this is the piece, this is a part of the piece that she made. It's like a 2.5 minute piece. We're just going to watch 12 seconds of it. Spoiler alert, Abe's big message was don't hate.
Don't hate anybody. I keep telling him you don't like somebody, but don't hate. That's my motto for the kids.
So to his last breath, that was what he was about. Sadly, his health took a turn for the worse. He actually flew out to California for his grandson's wedding in Los Angeles, but when he came back, something happened. It may have been early onset COVID. It might have been a stroke. It's unclear what happened, but he was not in good shape, and he was put under hospice care. And I went to visit him a few times, and the last time I saw him was January 12th, 2020. And he was very weak. I went to his bedside and he said to me, "Keep telling my story." And nobody's ever asked me to do that before. I said I would. I didn't know quite what that meant. And 3 days later, he passed away. Actually, 6 years ago to today, he died on January 15th. This is the news report from the next day. And he's buried next to his wife, Shirley. They were married for 63 years. And he is a Holocaust survivor who asked me to keep telling his story. So that's what I'm going to do for the next half hour or so with you. You've gotten a little bit of his story already. I had a chance to speak at one of the schools I taught at earlier in my teaching career in Washington, D.C. And there were about 550 students in the audience, and they gave Abe's story a standing ovation, which was very rewarding and I think deserved for Abe. So I'm going to now get into Abe's story, somewhat abridged here. The town where he grew up is called Bialobrzegi, and it was between Warsaw and Radom. It's maybe 4,000 people, half Jewish, half Polish. And this river is on the north side of the town, and that's going to be important for the story coming up. So he went back in 1991 and with his family and took a picture of the house where he grew up. There was nobody there when they went. The people next door invited them in for tea, but that's the house that he grew up in with his parents and his younger sister until he was just about 14 years old. This is the same house, different view. And when they went back in 91, there was still no running water. This is an outhouse that people shared on that street. So it gives you a sense of what living under Polish communism might have been like. That when Abe was growing up, there was one truck in his whole town. He'd never ridden on a truck, and it was very much horse and buggy time. Again, he was born in 1928. These are some pictures I found from the Yizgor book, like a memorial book of Bialobrzegi. These are people fishing on the bank of the river, and then when the river froze, people would ice skate. Abe learned to ice skate. He only had one skate, and so that was how he learned. When he took his kids ice skating later, he tried with two and he couldn't figure it out. So he just reverted to what he knew and he skated around on one skate. And this is Abe describing a few of the chores that he did growing up.
I used to help out that merchant setting up tents. A tent specifically. He used to give me a five groszy. It's not even a penny.
So is that what the market looked like in Bialobrzegi?
Yeah.
Yeah? So you helped set up one of those tents?
Tents, right.
I assume there was no running water?
No.
Is that how you fetched water, with the pails?
Yeah. I used to carry these 2 pails from house to house. They used to give me a penny. There was a well over here someplace.
So Abe's living a peasant life in Bialobrzegi, delivering water, helping the merchants set up, and then Germany invaded Poland on September 1st, 1939. They got to Radom, to Bialobrzegi pretty close after that. And Abe talks about uh, growing up in like there was a ghetto that was set up in his town. It didn't have walls, but it was clear the Jews were not to go outside of certain designated areas. And when he spoke at a military base in North Carolina called Camp Lejeune, he described how he and a friend, he was like 12 years old, they went out to go pick mushrooms so his mother could make mushroom soup. And they went outside where they were supposed to be, and they heard footsteps coming behind them. And I'll let Abe take the story from there.
And I said to my friend, somebody's coming, and I think the soldiers are coming towards us. I turned around, and sure enough, and they came as close to us about around 3-4 feet, and they asked me, comes here, younger? And I said, Mr. Juden. I say, are you Jewish? And I understand that word. I say, jawohl. So one of them took out the pistol, shot my friend in the head, and he fell down, and I ran so fast, they were shooting at me, and they didn't hit me, and I was hiding in the place where I used to hide and seek. They couldn't find me.
So when Abe started speaking at Camp Lejeune, he mentioned how good he was at hide and seek, and I think the military folks must have thought, we don't care about hide and seek, we want to hear your story. Hide and seek saved his life. His go-to spot was under the hay where the horses were eating. His friends could never find him there. And when he ran for his life, that's where he went and stayed until it was dark. When it was dark, he went home, told his parents what happened. His friend had been shot in front of him. They said, oh my gosh, that's horrible. You better change your clothes because they'll be looking for you in the morning. He only had 2 shirts and 2 pair of pants. So he put on the other clothes. His father gave him a hat, and thankfully they didn't recognize him. But the conditions were very difficult, and there was very little food in the ghetto from 1941 to 42. And then Abe was in 1942. This is a picture of his uncle Jacob, and his uncle Jacob was part of the Judenrat, the group that was sort of the intermediary between the Nazis and a group that of Jewish people that they had taken over. And so his uncle, as part of the Judenrat, was asked to provide 1 worker per household to report for forced labor. And in the Holocaust literature, this is often called a choiceless choice. There's no good option here. And Abe was only 13. He's not sure exactly what the conversation was, but his Uncle Jacob came the night before he was supposed to take somebody, and he said to Abe's father, like, hey, Abe doesn't know for sure, but he thinks he probably said, hey, if I take you, Abe's father, there's no way that Abe's mother can care for 2 little kids. So when I show up tomorrow, don't be here, right? And I'll take Abe instead. And so Abe's father went off he was a carpenter. He went off on a carpentry job, and Uncle Jacob showed up and said, Abe, you're coming with me. And it's his favorite uncle. He had no idea anything bad was happening. He said, oh, where are we going? Uncle Jacob doesn't tell him where they're going. Abe tries to turn away. Uncle Jacob grabs him by the wrist and says, no, you have to come with me. And he put him onto a truck that looked something like this. And the truck took him. He was 13 years old. He never saw his mother, father, little sister again. He didn't have a chance to pack anything up. And the truck took him from Bialobzegi to Radom, about 20 miles south. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip over this clip. If we have time, I'll come back to it. But this is Abe describing being taken to Bialobzegi and how the older people knew it was a concentration camp and were not happy with the barbed wire. Abe didn't speak a lot about this, so I'm not going to either. But if you're not familiar with daily life in a slave labor camp, it was pretty awful. You wake at dawn, you get a slice of bread, coffee's in quotes because it wasn't real coffee, it was chicory. They count you. The counting might take 15 minutes. If they're in a good mood, it might take up to an hour and a half, 2 hours. And that's in the burning hot sun and the freezing cold winter because he was there for 2 years. You march to the factory, you work 10 to 12 hours, and then you march back to the barracks and you get soup. If you knew the person ladling out the soup, you might get a vegetable piece. If not, you might just get broth. Rinse and repeat. Your job every day is to survive. And so Abe was there for 2 years. in Radom. And in July of 44, Russians approached from the east. The Nazis wanted to preserve their war assets, and so Abe and about 2,000 others were marched 55 miles over 3 days. If you couldn't keep up, you were shot, and they came to a train station. And like I said, that's the first time Abe had ever seen a train. They put him on a cattle car, and the cattle car took him to Auschwitz. Y'all are probably familiar with this sign, Arbeit macht frei. I learned recently, if you look at the B, it's upside down, right? If you make a B, usually they're the same size or the big one is at the bottom. If you Google Arbeit macht frei B blacksmith, you'll learn about a Polish blacksmith who has an act of resistance, a small act of resistance, but an act of resistance nonetheless, intentionally inverted that B. And so when Abe arrived at Auschwitz, these are people, I believe, from Hungary, and they all have luggage. Abe and his crew would not have had any luggage because they wouldn't have had anything with them. But that's what the platform looked like, and people would get off, and there would be, this is not Mengele, but he would be serving the same role here. This woman and this old child, this woman and this young child are going to be sent to this very long line up here. That's not the line you want to be in. They're going to be gassed and cremated within 3 hours. The gas chambers are disguised as showers. And so Abe's friends were concerned that he might get sent in the wrong line because he was one of the youngest people there. And so they lifted him up in the air to make him appear taller. And this is Abe recalling that moment on the platform at Auschwitz. He's picking up, this is a 2-hour interview that he did. Again, the first time he spoke about the Holocaust. So you're not going to see a polished speaker here. You're going to see somebody who's dealing with a story that he hadn't spoken about. He had nightmares about it, but he hadn't spoken about it for 50 years. And he's going to get emotional when he thinks about what his friends did on his behalf.
The next thing we knew, at least I knew, is the train stopped and they opened the door and they still didn't give us any water or food. A few of them died in the train. Who died, I don't know, because they took him away and they carried him out. I don't think there was a stretcher. They carried him by the arms and legs, and we had to line up. And all the women to one side, the men to the other side, and the older people to one side, and the younger people to one side. But I was the smallest one, so they put me in the middle. His name is Maya Flecker. You know, he was taller than I am, and he's alive today. And another fellow, I don't remember who was on the other side, picked me up by my arms. So I should look taller.
It's pretty amazing that they risked their lives like that for Abe. If they had been caught, they surely would have been murdered or at least beaten very badly. When Abe told this story at Camp Lejeune, he asked for 2 volunteers. He talked about how good he was at hide and seek, and then he asked for 2 volunteers. And these 2 gentlemen volunteered, and then he said, I want a short person. This woman volunteered, and he had them lift her up in the air. And he didn't tell the audience why he was doing this. He just said, keep this image in mind. Let's give him a round of applause. And they thought he was crazy. But this is Meyer Flecker. This is the other tall person, and that is Abe. when he and his wife moved to California, they drove cross country and they stopped in Kansas City to visit Meyer Flecker, who was still taller, which makes sense. Um, so Abe carried this picture of Meyer Flecker with him just about every time that he spoke. And during COVID, a friend of mine is a singer-songwriter, and she couldn't perform, so she pivoted to stop motion animation. And she made an animation using this as a model for Meyer Flecker, and this is as a model for Abe. And I'm going to play it for you. It's imagine Abe thinking back to when he was younger, what images might be going through his mind when he thinks about the platform at Auschwitz. And it goes about 45 minutes. You gotta watch carefully. There's no sound really. There's music, but. So that took her about 80 hours to make. I found that unbelievably impressive. I thought we'd be doing more with the chat, but I can't really monitor it. If some people want to come off of mute and just say, what was something in that animation that stood out to you? That would be great. I'd love to hear from anybody. Maybe we'll do it at the end. All right. Well, hopefully some things stood out to you about that. Often students will say the barking dog was something that they thought of, and the color of the sky is not a natural color because there were to be ashes of people regularly in the sky there. So Abe survived the selection at Auschwitz. And again, this is probably a 5 or 6 day cattle car journey to a place called Vaihingen. That's a picture that was taken in Vaihingen shortly after the war. You can see double barbed wire fences, and he had to do very hard work they were building some structure that never ended up getting finished. He got moved before they could complete it. His job was hauling heavy bags of concrete. If you dropped your bag of concrete, Abe remembered the SS would machine gun you to death. And he remembered having to walk around bodies of people who weren't able to hold their concrete. The Nazis kept very good records. This is Abe's departure from Vaihingen in October 14th of 1944 to a place called Hessenthal. And that's what Hessenthal looks like today. But if you go back in time on Google Earth, you can see the outline of the 4 barrack buildings that were there and that they got shipped off on trains sometimes, or sometimes they would walk to do various jobs. And today there's a cattle car here and a bunch of posts. You can see it a little bit clearer there. And I didn't visit this, but a researcher in Germany took this picture for me. There's the cattle car exhibit, and there's people's names are on these posts. And there's Abe from Bialybzegi to honor that he was a prisoner there. The winter of 44-45 was bitter cold, and many people had typhus. The work wasn't quite as hard as at Vaihingen, but these soldiers have full gear on, and they look pretty cold, and I imagine it was a very difficult time for Abe. The job he was doing was filling in bomb craters and repairing railroad ties, so maintaining German infrastructure. And then in April of 45, he was put on a train headed toward Dachau. Again, that was a very chaotic month at the end of the war. There's more to that story, but you heard him describe his liberation from a cattle car. He spent 2 years in displaced persons camps. That's a picture from the Foreign-Walled camp where he was, and that's a picture of Abe with a bicycle. He crossed the Atlantic in the summer of 47. His hotel room didn't overlook, but it was around the corner from Times Square. He was there for about 10 days, and then he got placed in a boarding house in Connecticut. I'm going to go real fast so we can have time for your questions here. He met his wife. They got married. She was not a Holocaust survivor. She grew up in Connecticut, and he joined the Connecticut National Guard and then the U.S. Army. And when his son was born, he went into the reserves, and so he didn't go to Korea. His unit did, but he did become a U.S. citizen in 1952. And then in 1956, he brought his family to see the Statue of Liberty, which must have been very meaningful for him. In 1964, he was able to purchase Richard's Bake Shop and became Richard, or whatever you wanted to call him, sort of owning his his own business. And that's a picture of Abe from the Wethersfield Post. That's his business card. And that you saw the picture of him with the challah earlier. This is him entertaining some Girl Scouts. And his kids talked about how he knew what it was like to be hungry, and he made sure nobody came away from his bakery without food.
I used to get up early in the morning and be at the bakery with him, and somebody knocked on the door, and I was doing things to help him, so it was kind of in my periphery that I saw he went to the door with bags of food, bread and rolls and pastries, and he gave it to somebody, and I said, "Dad, what was that all about?" And he goes, "Somebody was hungry, and nobody that's hungry that comes to this back door is going to go away without food." And made me realize he did that all the time.
And it was the back door.
It was
the back door. Regularly, somebody would knock on the back door, and he didn't say a word. He just looked and he goes, "Oh, here."
What was the name of the bakery?
Richard's Bake Shop.
And he was Richard. or anybody else that they called him.
So this is, I'm not sure if I set this up properly. That's Joe, his son, Pam, his daughter, and this is Joe's wife, Jane, who you're going to hear from in a moment. So, like I said, he was in Connecticut for about 18 years. And then when the kids were grown, Abe and Shirley moved to California. And then he was there for about 17 years. He worked at a place called Brown's Wilshire Bakery. He catered to the Hollywood set. He once delivered a cake to Steven Spielberg, which he liked to share, so I will share that with you as well. And then he retired to Florida. And he mainly spoke in the North Carolina area for the last decade of his life. But one time he took his show on the road to the State University of New York, Delhi, in upstate New York, where his son's a professor. And he spoke to a group of students in a history club, and he spoke for more than 2 hours. They took a quick break, and then more people came after the intermission, and it was a really powerful event. And at the end of that event, students had some questions for him, and Jane, Joe's wife, is going to describe what happened at the end of that event. I think it captures his spirit extremely well.
The end of that talk was, he answered questions, as probably he always did, from the students. And one of the students said, "How can you be so joyful? You just told us a story with horrific things that you experienced, and yet you were able to find happiness. How could you be so happy after what you lived through?" And he didn't answer right away. And I thought, oh boy, I'm sure he's got that question before, but he didn't answer right away. He just stood there. And then he said, "I had a choice to make, and I chose to be happy." And that was how it ended. I was just like, yeah. And he obviously did. Yeah.
So Abe was still volunteering at a bakery in Raleigh when he was in his late 80s and early 90s. I'll let him get off a quick one-liner here.
I still got a part-time job as a baker. I'm still working today. I'm still rolling in dough, but it's not green. It's a different color. Yeah.
So this is a picture of him on a cruise, I believe, to Alaska, and this is him at his granddaughter Katie's wedding in Hawaii. And students often are amazed that after his wife died, he mourned for a few years. And then he met this woman, Judy, who was his partner for the last years of his life, and they were sort of amazed that this 88, 89-year-old guy had a girlfriend. But she came with him to the wedding. And Katie, after Abe passed away, had a baby boy. This is Joe holding his grandson, Abe's great grandson. And Katie said something to me, that the obligatory cute picture of Billy. She lamented that Billy would never get to meet Abe and would never hear his classic, joking, cheerful voice. And I thought those are the perfect adjectives to describe Abe's voice and his temperament, I think. And what makes that even more remarkable is that he had nightmares on a regular basis. He wouldn't talk about it unless you asked him about it. And some students at Enloe High School, 5 years before I met him, asked this question. I got some materials from Abe's family after he passed away, and there's a DVD that had this talk. And this is his response to, "Do you still have nightmares?"
At least 2, 3 times a week. I wake up sweating. I see the people who got killed. I see the people who I walked over when they were dead. Everything comes before me at night.
So the fact that he went into the cattle car, given that history, is, again, just, it's one of the most remarkable things I've ever seen anyone do. I'm going to give the second to last word to Abe's grandson, Jefferson. This is a picture taken either right before or right after Jefferson's bar mitzvah in 2004. So Abe would have been 76. Jefferson would have been about 13. And I just got this picture recently from Joe, Abe's son. There's Abe, and there's his grandson at the bar mitzvah. And I showed Jefferson the same clip I showed you guys where Abe said, "Don't hate." And this is his response to that clip.
Don't hate anybody.
See the clip again.
I keep telling him, you don't like somebody, but don't hate. That's my motto for the kids.
Yeah, that clip you played is rings like really deep with me, because it seems like he's concentrated really hard on how to phrase that, and that's the exact way that he told me when I was much younger and before he was so frail. He was always like one of the most vibrant grandpas I've ever seen. He was always walking around and doing things and handy. So it's interesting to see him in that clip. It's not how I really remember him, but it's still beautiful. And it's very apparent that he wanted to reiterate that message. Tell him you don't like him, not that you hate him. That's so classic. Classic Abe.
So the Yehuda Bauer is sort of the in North Carolina, we go with basketball analogies. One of the Michael Jordan of Holocaust historians. He's written more than 40 books. He passed away recently, but he gave a speech at the first International Holocaust Remembrance Day event at the UN, and he said that after the Holocaust, there should be 3 more commandments added to the 10 commandments. Yeah, so that's the speech that he gave. You can look that up if you want. It's a powerful speech. But thou shalt not be a perpetrator, thou shalt not be a victim, and thou shalt never but never be a bystander. And I think that'll set up Abe for the final word of this presentation. The opposite of a bystander, often students will know that in today's lingo, it's an upstander, right? And so if you see hate or discrimination, be an upstander, not a bystander. Take inspiration from Abe's courage and his resilience and do something. People would come up to him pre-COVID and hug him and say, "What can I do?" And this is what he would often say.
And I said, do me a favor. Speak. If you see somebody is getting hurt or bullying, speak up. Don't let them do that.
So speak up. Don't let them do that. And that is the story, in brief, of my friend Abe Piasek. I will stop sharing and would love any questions, comments, thoughts.
Thank you, Steve. That was That's amazing. You're truly keeping Abe's memory as a blessing. I'm going to ask the first question, and that is, are any of the members of his family also sharing his story, or is it just being passed on now through you?
So his son and daughter aren't really interested in doing that, and the grandkids are, um, in their careers, right? So they're not at an age where they would do that, and they've given me their blessing. I actually meet with his daughter pretty regularly. She lives maybe 25 minutes away in North Carolina, and I'm hoping to visit his son in upstate New York. He has a lot of papers and things, and you might even have some videos that Abe took when he visited Bialybzegi. So I've become the unofficial family historian. And if you're familiar with the term 2G and 3G, second generation and third generation, we're calling me an unofficial 2.5G. So
Very nice. Well, it's truly a blessing that you're doing this too. It's just so important that the stories of our survivors, and then now as we now use the two and three generation to keep telling the story. Are there other questions that we have for Steve?
No, I just want to say that this talk was extremely organized and you put a lot of work into it, and I really appreciate it. And it was great. Thank you.
Thank you. That means a lot.
We're very
Yes.
honored that he's, one second, Dan, we're very honored again that he'll be coming in for the Week of Understanding and sharing Abe with middle school and high school students, and then at the Durham Museum on the Wednesday evening of the week. Go ahead, Dana. Excuse me.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if all this media and the video and all are also in the United States Holocaust Museum.
No, and I think the clip of him where he's describing his friends lifting him in the air is from his Shoah interview, and that is at the Holocaust Museum. The other ones are interviews that I did with him at his house and a few of public events, and like the DVD from the Enloe High School that his family gave to me. That's an interesting. Your question suggests that maybe that those could be donated to the museum as well, and I that's something I can look into doing. I'm redoing a website and just trying to get his story out to people, but that's the only one that's at the museum is the Shoah interview. But was that the direction you were going with the question?
Yeah, there's a lot in their archive. My mother's life paralleled this a little bit. She was born in 1928 in Vienna, but she was able to get rescued in 1939. And, we've given pretty much whatever we have. They keep it in the archives. And if anybody in the family wants to see what's on that, they will give you a personal tour.
Right. Steve, I have a couple of, I've worked with a couple of the archivists. We can talk when you're here. I can give you their contact information.
Sure. And Dana, to build on that, like in preparing some of the work I've been doing, we've put together a joint family photo album. It's a series of Google slides that many of his relatives and friends have contributed to. And so it's really nice to be able to see pictures. I didn't show you all the pictures I have of him, but people are sharing from different points in his life. And it's been a number of his family members had never heard the story before, because it's not like, you sit down at Thanksgiving and say, let me tell you a horrible story, right? And there was also some shielding of the kid. He didn't speak about it when his kids were growing up. So, yeah, it's been really interesting to have his family learn about it from him through me, in a way.
Definitely.
Other questions? Steve, I want to thank you. I'm excited that you'll be joining us. I think that, again, very unique that a friend is carrying on the legacy, and that Abe's memory now is continuing. Just as a side note, I was able to study a little bit with Yehuda Bauer, and he's a personal hero. And I think it's great that I know that quote a lot, but he was quite an extraordinary person.
Thanks. Yeah, that's why I want to hear more about that at some point. I'm working on a book. The first part of the book is Abe's story. The second part of the book is the remarkable things that have happened to me as a result of sharing the story. And one thing that happened was during COVID, I ended up teaching a class in Baltimore, even though I wasn't living in Baltimore, but there was a teacher who couldn't teach his class, and I knew the head of the school, and they brought me in to teach over Zoom. And I emailed Yehuda Bauer and asked if he would meet with my students. And he said, well, I don't usually meet with high school students. Tell me more. And I told him more, and we sent questions, and he talked with our students for about an hour and a half. And
That's wonderful.
It was really remarkable. And for the students who really appreciated, who that was and what that meant, it was an amazing experience.
He was quite an extraordinary human being.
Yeah, it's also great that Abe has an extrovert personality, and he was able to relay this to other people. I think Steve Wies's mother was a Holocaust survivor, and
Right.
he is very willing to talk about that also. Steve
Well,
Wies
we have-
lives in Omaha.
Yeah, and Steve, I was just telling Steve about him. He'll get a chance to meet him when he's here. But we have all of our 2Gs and 3Gs are carrying on the legacy of the survivors, and that's the situation we're in now. And each has their own unique way of telling the story. I think the wonderful part of all this is as a result of Schindler's List and the Shoah Foundation, that so many survivors had their recording of their testimony, and now their children and grandchildren can use those to tell their story, continuing their story, keeping that memory alive.
And it's interesting, Abe really was not an extrovert until he retired. Right? Like he was fun in some family settings. He had a good sense of humor, but he had never done public speaking before his interview. And so the courage to sit for the interview in 95 is really impressive to me. And then he made the decision to start sharing the story in Florida. And I don't know exactly how many times he shared it there. But again, he moved to North Carolina. His wife passed away unexpectedly in 2012, and he had more time, I guess, on his hands. And he became like a rock star within the Holocaust education world here. And I follow up with people who had met him, and at the mention of his name, they light up, and they have such wonderful things to say about him. And so it's an honor to carry on his legacy.
Well, I'm glad that we were able to hear it. I'm glad that you'll be sharing it with students here in Nebraska and with the community. And I'll be in touch with you next week. But I again, thank you very much. Next month, we have the honor of hearing Dr. Doyle Stivic, who is the director of the Anne Frank Center here, actually in South Carolina, University of South Carolina, who we worked with the Anne Frank Traveling Exhibit and Education Program. And he's going to talk about his philosophy and what led him to be the director of the Anne Frank House Center. And it's a unique story. He's a wonderful storyteller also. And so I look forward to seeing you all next month. And Steve, I'll be in touch with you next week.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks everybody for coming out.
Thank you for all being here.